The Sahara is one of the planet's great deserts and has shaped both political and human development on the African continent for thousands of years. Huge empires arose here in the middle of the desert. For example, the Egyptians. At the same time, a large part of the country was always considered barren and hostile to people. However, researchers have now discovered that the famous desert may have looked very different in the past. Around 5,000 years ago, parts of the desert are said to have had lush vegetation and even been home to people. In this video, you'll find out what happened to the Sahara and what it originally looked like. Before we get started, be sure to hit the like button and ring the notification bell for more videos. Also, stick around until the end to learn about one of the most unbelievable theories yet regarding the Sahara. Home of humans and animals. The assumption that the entire region of the Sahara could have looked completely different just a few thousand years ago has been around for some time now. Researchers have therefore set out in search of traces of the original Sahara and have come across a system of ancient canals, irrigation threads, and even rivers. If one were to use today's standards, the irrigation chain was so extensive that there could have even been entire forests in the Sahara. The last time, around 5,000 years ago, was when these systems and rivers carried enough water to allow extensive vegetation in the Sahara. Researchers also assume that over the past 20,000 years, several intense climate changes have been responsible for the state of the Sahara. A system of broad rivers may have formed 9 times during this period. The last remnant of these ancient rivers is today the Nile, which also became the lifeline for the Egyptian empires. All of this could also explain when and how people from Central Africa migrated to the rest of the world and why they did it. Rivers existed 100,000 years ago. An important clue to the research surrounding rivers in the Sahara was the migration routes that led from the first humans across the Sahara towards the Mediterranean Sea. It would have been almost impossible to leave the African continent through the Sahara if the same inhumane conditions prevailed. However, modern studies assume that there were 3 rivers that led up to 1,000 kilometers through the desert towards the Mediterranean Sea. The corresponding systems could not only be proven based on the research, but also with clues from old maps. The researchers assumed that the rivers originated in the mountains and reached from North Africa to the Mediterranean Sea at various points. People are said to have moved along these rivers when they started their way from Central Africa. At the same time, the rivers also ensured that 70,000 years ago, there were swamps and lagoons in the middle of Libya, where today little more than sand can be found, and which is now completely dry. The exact traces of the rivers are also lost today in the dune system of the Sahara. Rivers once ran through the Sahara. The so-called Tamanrasset River is currently the focus of research. While on the basis of previous studies, it's certain that there must have been at least 3 rivers. The Tamanrasset left what are probably the clearest geological traces that can still be fathomed today. One satellite image above all is of particular importance to the researchers. Using modern technology that can look underground with the images, the researchers discovered a river in northwest Africa that, based on the remains of the riverbed, must have been about 320 kilometers long. If one took the length of today's rivers for comparison, the river would have been the 11th longest river in the world. The special feature is not only the length or the fact that today no traces can be found on the surface, it's mainly the route. Located in northwest Africa, where you really only find sand and boulders today, it must have decisively shaped and changed the landscape during its existence. The course of the river has also given other important clues in research about the Sahara. So far, one has not been quite sure what caused the unique formations in the mountains around the desert. In addition, traces have been found that there must have been gigantic lakes in the middle of the desert that had to be fed from something. With the discovery of the river that once separated almost the entire desert, we have another important indicator for the search for these areas. The largest lake in the world. Not only the rivers have given an indication that Central Africa once looked completely different. Above all, there are the mega lakes, some of which have existed for thousands of years and then dried up completely within a very short time. A particular example of this is the so-called Mega Chad, which was one of 4 major lakes located in the Sahel. The lakes are said to have played an important role not only in Africa. Researchers assume that the fertile dust from this area was blown across the Atlantic and played an important role in the formation of the rainforests in South America. Above all, however, it's an indication of how green the region must have been in the past. At the time of its greatest expansion, Mega Chad covered an area of about 2 million square kilometers and would have been the largest lake on Earth. That was about 55,000 years ago when the lake was filled for the first time in its history. After that, climate change is said to have caused the first drying up, and the lake finally shrank to a size of around 350,000 square kilometers, which is still a gigantic area compared to its current extent of around 355 square kilometers. It can be observed that the lake continues to shrink today, mainly due to human consumption of fresh water. The original process may have had other reasons. The climate changes in Africa led to a significant decrease in monsoon occurrences and thus to a significantly lower water discharge into the lake. A constant and rapid shrinking and evaporation process is said to have started as early as 4000 BC. Already 4,000 years ago, the lake had dried up so much that the first known records only spoke of 3 small lakes and no longer of Mega Chad. This means that the largest lake on Earth has almost completely dissolved within a few hundred years, and thus, of course, also caused corresponding after effects in the region. Rapid transformation. In general, researchers today are primarily concerned with the question of how quickly the Sahara transformed into the desert it is today. Assuming that the region must have had various lakes and rivers that dried up within a few hundred years, the corresponding change in the Sahara must have happened surprisingly quickly. It's now assumed that there must have been a strong geological change around 5,000 years ago that was noticeable across the entire northern hemisphere. The region in Africa was particularly affected, where the torrential rains that had previously planted the region suddenly stopped. With the extinction of the great rivers in what is now the Sahara, the age of mega lakes on the African continent also ends. Within a few hundred years, under the new conditions, a once fertile region gradually turned into a desert and got the face that you can still see today when you look at the Sahara. Research in this area also gives important clues to climate change as it's currently being felt on Earth. Although the main focus here is on the human influence on speed, similar changes can already be noticed. Southern Europe in particular is suffering from effects similar to those that were once found in the Sahara. Here, too, the soil is gradually drying up, and in parts of Europe, deserts are beginning to develop. While at the same time, in other parts of the world, the rising sea levels are causing the coast to be flooded. Antique maps. The changes on the African continent are not yet complete. On the contrary, as the discovery of various ancient maps of the continent shows, the change is still in a state that is constantly changing the image of Africa. For example, while certain parts of the continent are still experiencing increased drought and lakes continue to dry up, this is also changing the picture for the rivers found further south in Africa. More and more lakes in the equator region are drying up. Since the first maps, which can be dated to around the early 16th century, humans have of course had an increased influence on development in Africa. A comparison of ancient maps with modern images, which can be taken today by satellites, for example, show that the course of the Nile has changed significantly over the past 500 years. This is due to both natural developments and the increased influence of humans, who, for example with reservoirs or artificial river diversions, are causing major changes to the landscape in certain parts of the continent. This not only affects the economies of the countries and the homeland of many indigenous peoples, but has also led to political tensions in the recent past. Many of the existing rivers are a precious currency for the countries, and at the same time for the formation of the borders. Due to the constant change on the African continent, this could lead to further consequences such as poverty or the enlargement of the deserts in the future. It's now considered certain that the Sahara blossomed 3 times in the past 200,000 years, and each time for several thousand years. The first phase occurred around 120,000 years ago and lasted around 10,000 years. 50 to 45,000 years ago, the dry desert presented itself again in a lush green. The last heyday to date ended around the year 3200 BC. When the wasteland was still a fertile savanna, there were still many hunter-gatherers who eventually began farming and raising livestock. What not everyone knows is that the Sahara used to be adorned with one of the largest lakes in the history of the Earth. This was the previously mentioned Megachad, which once had an area of 1.95 million square kilometers. For classification, the Caspian Sea, currently the largest lake on Earth, has an area of 371,000 square kilometers, while Megachad still had an area of 360,000 square kilometers and an average depth of 65 meters 6,000 years ago. It began to dry out more and more in the course of local climate changes. So it happened that 4,000 years ago, the gigantic body of water was divided into 3 significantly smaller lakes, of which only 2 still exist today. Of course, the onset of the dry period did not only affect the waters, the savannas, the animals, and the majority of the human inhabitants also retreated from the ever-expanding arm of the desert. From then on, the peoples who settled in the Sahara in the following centuries were dependent on the oasis economy and trade with other groups. However, in the light of official historiography, a pressing question arises. How is it possible that numerous lakes and rivers still adorn some maps drawn long after the Sahara's last heyday? To get closer to this exciting topic, let's first take a look at a rather unknown map. The corresponding object dates back to 1551 and was once owned by King Ludwig II. In the corresponding image, we can see many watercourses that meander from the coast deep inland. However, we look in vain for the corresponding rivers on modern maps. Even more mysterious is the great river that runs straight through the middle of the Sahara. But which river could it be specifically? At first, one might think that we're dealing here with Senegal. However, if we look at the location and course of the river, this assumption seems anything but likely. Anyone who thinks that King Ludwig II's map is a faulty one-off is wrong. The Portuguese cartographer Diogo Homem, who also lived in the 16th century, made a comparable illustration. Here, too, we find the mighty river that runs from the east of the Sahara across the desert and almost flows into the mighty Nile. But how is it that we know so little about this huge river today? Did the body of water suddenly dry up and then fall completely into oblivion? The maps by the geographer Gerhard Mercator also suggest that the natural face of the Sahara was completely different a few centuries ago than it is today. In addition to the already mentioned river in the desert, we come across another striking detail here. On the map of Mercator, we can see how the Nile branches out and splits in different directions. Today, however, there's no trace of such a course. Mysterious stone structures. As briefly mentioned, much of the Western Sahara is still awaiting archaeological exploration. The hundreds of mysterious stone structures that were unearthed there a few years ago showed just how rewarding it can be to investigate these vast tracts of land. The fact that the relevant areas have so far only been examined very sparsely is mainly due to the many political and military conflicts that flare up there again and again. The discovery of the countless stone structures therefore seems all the more valuable. These have a wide variety of shapes. While some are reminiscent of crescents, others are circular, straight, or rectangular. Still others have been piled into heaps or present themselves as flat platforms. Taken together, the individual objects form a complex over 600 meters long. However, it's not clear what purpose the different structures once served. Some of them may have functioned as tombstones, at least according to the 1,500-year-old human bones found there. The remarkable find shows us once again how much the face of the Sahara has changed over the centuries. Significantly more animals lived here than today. Among other things, rock drawings of cattle, giraffes, and antelopes have already been discovered there. Water under the Sahara. A few years ago, a team of experts made a sensational discovery under the hot desert sand of the Sahara. What seems almost unimaginable in view of the endless dune landscapes could be proven beyond doubt with the help of modern satellite measurements. As it would soon turn out, below the Sahara, there's an abundance of groundwater that's regularly replenished. According to researchers, 1.4 cubic kilometers of new water flows into the underground water system every year. If this continues, it's possible that, over the course of many years, rivers may begin to flow through the region once more. Previously, scientists had argued that the accumulations of groundwater in the Sahara were fossil fuels that have practically not received any new inflow in thousands of years. However, we now know that this is not true. The massive water system extends over a considerable area of more than 1 million square kilometers in the north of the Sahara. In detail, there are estimated to be around 1,300 cubic kilometers of cool water there. This natural water deposit enables, among other things, the existence of flowering oases in the middle of the sandy desert. However, the corresponding groundwater resources have been tapped since the 1960s. Since more water is withdrawn every year than can be formed, many of the natural sources threaten to dry up in the future. Unfortunately, this means that unless locals can find an alternative source of water, it's unlikely that the Sahara will be able to replenish itself in any meaningful way. Furthermore, the locals who currently use this as a water source will eventually be forced to move when the water dries up. With all this in mind, is it possible that at some point in the future, the many lakes that have dried up thousands of years ago will be revived? While experts believe this is increasingly unlikely, you have to admit, stranger things have certainly happened. We don't know much for sure at the moment, but time will tell whether or not the Sahara will soon return to its former glory. Clayton Rings. While the experts have been able to draw important conclusions about the development of ancient creatures with the help of the fossils discovered from the dried-up lakes of the Sahara, the discovery of the Clayton Rings still pose great puzzles for experts today. These mysterious, wide-open ceramic rings were first discovered in 1932 by British desert explorer Patrick Clayton. Just 5 years later, the German researcher Rudolf Cooper succeeded in uncovering comparable structures in the Egyptian Eastern Sahara. However, most Clayton rings were found between 1995 and 2000. So far, the archaeologists have come across more than 40 different sites that housed a total of 150 examples of these mystical ceramic objects. To this day, scientific minds argue about the purpose of these recovered artifacts and why they were made. What is certain is that the Clayton rings originated in the pre-dynastic period of ancient Egypt. Although most of the objects were found individually, some experts believe that they once formed contiguous structures. If this is true, there's a chance that if all the artifacts were eventually found, it may paint a much different and clearer history of the area. Since the corresponding archaeological sites did not house any cultural material, it can be concluded that the respective sites only served as short-term storage areas. However, it's completely unclear what role the Clayton rings played during these desert trips. As it stands now, the Clayton rings remain a mystery. There have been countless theories shared over the years. However, without further evidence being unearthed, it's possible that we may never know what they would have originally been used for. The Nabta Playa Flats. Located about 100 kilometers west of Abu Simbel in the east of the Sahara, the Nabta Playa salt flats embody one of the most fascinating archaeological sites on our globe. Over the years, researchers have managed to unearth countless artifacts from our ancestors that give us a vivid insight into the course of human history. The background. As an ancient caravan route, the Nabta Playa was used for many thousands of years. Among other things, the archaeologists recovered 8,000-year-old ceramic fragments here. However, these were not just simply processed everyday objects, but colorful, intricately decorated artifacts. In fact, some discoveries suggest that the inhabitants of the Nabta Playa plain at the time were socially significantly more organized than the settlers in the Nile Valley. On the other hand, other objects show us which sacred rituals the people performed in the salt flats. So the sacrifice of cattle was an integral part of cultural life. The animals were then buried in stone chambers. It's possible that this cult later rubbed off on some of the customs of the ancient Egyptians. One of the greatest archaeological attractions of the Nabta Playa plain is an ancient stone circle. Built near a dry lake, the monument is often referred to as the Stonehenge of the Sahara, a name that's somewhat misleading. The construct in the desert is actually around 1,000 years older than the world-famous stone circle in England. It's one of the oldest known prehistoric observatories. It's very likely that the cluster of megaliths was used for calendrical purposes, such as to determine the summer solstice. That way, people knew when it was time to move to winter quarters. It's commonly assumed that the Nabta Playa plain represented something like the cradle of many cultural and social achievements. The astronomical calendar development, dairy farming, and the cattle farming could have been transferred from here to many other advanced cultures. Wadi al-Hitan. How much the natural face of the Sahara has changed over the millennia becomes clear to us when we take a look at the Wadi al-Hitan. This dry valley in the northern parts of Egypt extends over an area of almost 1,800 square kilometers and is home to one of the most exciting paleontological treasures in history. In fact, the researchers found countless fossils of prehistoric whale species in what is now practically nothing but dust-dry soil. About 40 million years ago, the area was covered by the Tethys Ocean. This vast, gigantic sea eventually disappeared when India and Africa collided with Eurasia. Before that, however, the Tethys Ocean had served as a permanent home for a wide variety of underwater inhabitants. So far, the researchers have succeeded in recovering 250 of these venerable specimens from the Valley of the Whales. More specifically, it contained the fossilized remains of the legendary Dorodon and Basilosaurus. The Basilosaurus, also known as the king lizard, died out around 35 million years ago if modern scientific techniques are to be believed. The shape of the imposing body, around 18 meters long, was reminiscent of a terrifying giant snake. In all likelihood, the extinct whale species regularly hunted prehistoric fish and smaller marine mammals. But also, the Dorodon knows how to fascinate us with his unique shape. In fact, it was a direct relative of the king lizard. However, with a length of no more than 5 meters, these early whales were significantly smaller than their upcoming contemporaries. The fossils found in the Egyptian Sahara are of exceptional importance in the ranks of the researchers because they can be used to observe the ancestry of whales from land animals. According to this, the vestiges of hind legs can still be seen on the remains of the ancient whales, while the streamlined shape of the body was already perfectly aligned with life in the water. Thank you for watching. Click on one of the pictures and watch another exciting video. If you like this video, please give us a thumbs up. And to never miss new videos again, click subscribe, and we'll see you again soon.